My amendment has nothing to do with whether or not colored people or black people or anybody can serve, okay? It has nothing to do with color of your skin, any of that stuff. What we want to preserve and maintain is the fact that our military does not become a social experiment. We want the best of the best.
You heard that right. Republican Congressman Eli Crane did indeed refer to black Americans as, quote, colored people during the debate over his proposed amendment to the defense spending bill on the House floor on Thursday. Immediately after that remark, though, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, asked that the derogatory phrase be stricken from the record. And when asked about his choice of words, Congressman Crane says he, quote, misspoke. His comment came just days after Senator Tommy Tuberville had a hard time determining whether white nationalists are racists or not.
But just to be clear, you agree that white nationalists should not be serving in the U.S. military. Is that what you're saying? If people think that a white nationalist is a racist, I agree with that. I agree they should. A white nationalist is someone who believes that the white race is superior to other races. Well, that's some people's opinion. And I don't think,
That's
I mean,
not
a lot.
opinion.
Pardon?
What's your opinion?
My opinion of a white nationalist, if somebody wants to call him white nationalist, to me is an American. It's an American.
After more convoluted explanations, Tuberville finally did admit that white nationalists are racist. But the fact that it took him so long to get there is very telling. Joining me now, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, founding director of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research and author of Stamped from the Beginning, A Graphic History of Racist Ideas in America. Also joining us, Carol Anderson, professor and chair of African American Studies at Emory University and author of White Rage. Thank you both so much for coming to the Sunday show. I'd like for each of you to give your reaction to this week's ridiculous comments from Republican lawmakers. Professor Anderson, I'll start with you.
It is foundational to what the MAGA movement is. It is about trying to drag the United States back to an era where there was exclusive white access to incredible resources and everybody else was in their place, so that women were in their place, Black people were in their place, Indigenous people were in their place. This is about setting up a structure, a systemic structure of inequality, trying to reinforce that. That is what this is. This is their giving voice to their longing of that, but it's also a kind of valorization of color blindness while normalization of white supremacy. And that valorization of color blindness is what we saw in the Shelby County v. Holder decision that said that racism no longer exists, certainly not like it was. And that's what we saw in the recent affirmative action decision, that this has to be about merit. This isn't about race. And so color blindness gets this heightened status while ignoring the operational power and heft of white supremacy in American society.
And Dr. Kendi, I would love your reaction to this, but also how concerning is all this for democracy?
Well, white nationalism is a branch of white supremacy. White nationalists believe that white people should dominate the United States. White nationalists believe that the United States was founded for white people, by white people. And so there's no area, there's no place for a multiracial democracy within the ideology of white nationalists. And they see any attempt to create democracy as an attack on them. And they also consider any attack, any ability to create democracy as somehow attacking white people, which is why they call those of us who believe in equality, those of us who believe in democracy, racist.
You know, Professor Anderson, in your book, White Rage, you talk about how what we're seeing, basically what we're seeing right now is part of a cycle. This isn't new. And you take us through how for every advancement that African Americans have made, there has been an unequal and ferocious backlash to those advancements, right?
Right, absolutely. And so part of what we're seeing is that because you had massive turnout in the 2020 election, that where you had Black folk basically voting out a white supremacist from the White House, getting rid of Donald Trump. The response to that was the big lie of massive rampant voter fraud and basically trying to delegitimize the American citizenship of Black people, of Latinos, of Indigenous people, of Asian Americans, trying to say that their votes didn't count. Because if as Tuberville said, I believe it was him, that if we only count the legitimate votes, then Trump is having his second term. And so we saw we're dealing with a wave of massive voter fraud, election integrity laws that are really about voter suppression, about how do you keep these folk from being able to access the ballot box so that we can reinstall a white supremacist.
Dr. Kendi, my big question in all of this, as we see what in my lifetime has been just, especially since Donald Trump came down that escalator and pulled the lid off, our roiling racial tensions, they've just been mounting and getting worse. And I'm just wondering, do you think we can get through this? That we as a nation can get through this?
Well, I come from a tradition of people who were enslaved, who believed that we could overcome slavery, who believed that the day of Jubilee could come, who fought for a multiracial democracy that benefited everyone. And so I think standing in that tradition, I do believe we could get through this, but the only way in which we get through this is by fighting white nationalists who do not believe in democracy, who believe in a form of white supremacy that isn't even beneficial to most white people, if we fight them head on and build equity and equality for us all.